Welcome to Twilight Fables, where shadows gather and old tales are given new life. Tonight, we enter a story of promises, feasts, and voices that should never have been consumed. This is the Robber Bridegroom, the Feast of Echoes. The forest near Elsbach was not merely dense with trees, but dense with silence. The villagers had grown used to its unnatural hush. Children whispered to each other about how, if you entered too far, your words would stick to the bark, your songs would vanish, and when you turned to speak again, your own voice would not return. Hunters rarely ventured past the first mile of woodland, and when they did, they came back quieter, staring too long at nothing in particular, their voices trembling when they tried to laugh. It was into this village, already steeped in hush, that the miller's daughter lived. Her name was Amelie, and she had hair like ash wood, and a voice like running water. It was her voice, perhaps more than her beauty, that drew the attention of the wealthy suitor who appeared one summer afternoon. He was tall, dressed finely, his smile measured but pleasant. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that said his wealth and power were already assured. To Amelie's father, a poor miller whose debts had grown heavier each year, the man seemed like Providence itself. "This is your fortune," her father whispered after their first supper with the stranger. "He will take you from this place, Amelie, a home of wealth, comfort, all you've ever dreamed." But Amelie had not dreamed of wealth or marble floors. She had dreamed of music, of a future where her songs travelled beyond Elsbach. Still, she obeyed her father and the suitor, who introduced himself only as Herr Conrad, was gracious, patient, and always listening too closely. He leaned toward her when she spoke, eyes narrowing slightly, as though memorizing every lilt and cadence. His compliments were not on her looks, but on her voice. "You speak as though the woods themselves would bend to hear you," he told her once. A sound no echo could capture. Her betrothal was agreed upon within a week. The date of their wedding was not yet fixed, but Herr Conrad insisted Amelie must see his home before the union could be completed. "It is in the forest," he said, gesturing toward the dark line of trees. "Not so deep as the superstitious villagers claim. A place of quiet, yes, but you will find it peaceful. I will send for you. Come with no one else, for the path is narrow." The request unsettled her. The villagers had long whispered of disappearances, women promised to men who led them into the forest, never to be seen again. But Conrad's gaze was steady, and her father dismissed her hesitation as childish nerves. "You will go," he told her firmly, "and when you return, you will have no doubts." So Amelie set out on the appointed day, carrying a basket of bread as though it might ward away the unease curdling her stomach. The forest seemed darker than usual, each tree bending inward, narrowing the sky. She followed a trail strewn with strange tokens, white feathers, scraps of ribbon, even a child's shoe. Each lay as though placed deliberately, pointing her onward. The silence grew heavier the farther she walked. Her footsteps made no sound. Even the crunch of gravel beneath her shoes died before reaching her ears. She tried humming, and the notes vanished into the air without echo or resonance. It was as if the forest swallowed her voice whole. At last she reached a clearing. A house stood there, stone walls pale as bone, its windows narrow like watchful eyes. A faint hum emanated from within, not mechanical but organic, like many voices speaking just below hearing. Conrad appeared at the doorway, smiling. "Welcome, bride. You have found your way." The interior was lavish but unsettling. Tapestries covered the walls, yet their images were not of saints or hunts, but of faces, countless faces, woven in thread, mouths open mid-scream, eyes wide as if caught at the moment of terror. She touched one tapestry, and the woven mouth moved, only slightly, as if whispering, though no sound escaped. "You like them?" Conrad's voice was smooth, too smooth. Echoes made still, memory captured. Every guest leaves their mark. She turned sharply. "Guests? My brothers are waiting. Tonight they feast." And they did come, a procession of men dressed finely, each bearing the same hungry smile. They welcomed her, bowed low, praised her beauty, but again their compliments circled only her voice. "You will sing for us, won't you?" one asked, his tone almost pleading. Amelie's heart pounded. Something in their eyes told her this was not a request. Still, she tried. She sang one of the songs she often hummed while working at the mill. The notes left her lips, but instead of fading, they were caught. The air shimmered, her melody hung suspended, a silver thread curling upward, coiling into a goblet held by Conrad. He smiled as the last note was drawn from her mouth, leaving her breathless. He drank. The room seemed to sigh as he swallowed her song. It was not wine in his cup, but her voice itself, reduced to liquid light. "You see, brothers," Conrad said softly, "she is rich indeed. Her voice could feed us for years." The men applauded, laughter rippling. Amelie clutched her throat, horrified. She tried to speak, but the words stumbled from her lips, empty, thinned of their music. They had stolen the soul of her song, and she understood dimly what became of the other women who entered this place. Not flesh, not blood, but the self itself, sipped away until nothing was left but hollow echo. Amelie's hands trembled. She forced herself to smile. "Would you like another song?" she whispered, buying herself time, for already, in the corner of the room, she noticed a second tapestry beginning to shift, a woman's face, her eyes pleading. The woven lips formed a word Amelie almost understood. "Run." The feast began, though not with food. Amelie sat at a long oak table, surrounded by Conrad and his so-called brothers. Silver platters gleamed, goblets sparkled, yet not a single crumb of bread or piece of meat lay upon the table. Instead, each goblet brimmed with shifting light, captured voices woven into drink. One brother tipped his glass to her and swallowed. His throat pulsed, his eyes rolled back, and for a brief, horrifying moment, another voice, high, lilting, unmistakably feminine, escaped his lips. It was laughter, but it did not belong to him. Amelie's stomach turned. She recognized the laugh. It was Elspeth, the baker's daughter, who had disappeared months ago. Another brother raised his goblet, and as he drank, he began to recite a lullaby. Amelie had heard it before, sung by old Martha, the woman who vanished the winter prior. The words flowed from his mouth like water, yet his lips twisted them wrong, making the lullaby sound grotesque. Unfinished, everywhere around her, voices that were not their own filled the hall. Women of the village, some she knew by name, some only by faint memory, and some unknown altogether. Their laughter, songs, screams, consumed and imitated like delicacies. The faces on the tapestries trembled, as if stirred by wind. Their mouths moved, but only silence came forth. Yet Amelie sensed their agony in every strained stitch. "You see," Conrad told her, his smile thin, "this is our nourishment. Flesh rots, bones crumble, but voices are eternal. We drink them and we live long, each sound a thread of soul." He leaned close, so close she could feel his breath. "Yours will be sweetest of all. Sing for us, bride, sing until the cup is full." She forced herself to breathe evenly. Panic would betray her. "I am honoured," she whispered, bowing her head. "But if I am to give you my voice, I would ask a favour first." Conrad raised an eyebrow. His brothers chuckled. "A bold request," one said, licking his lips. "What is it you seek, little bride?" Her mind raced. If she refused, they would drain her dry that very night. If she agreed too eagerly, suspicion might fall. She needed time, a crack, a distraction, an escape. "Show me," she said carefully, "how my voice will be preserved. Let me see the vessel. I will sing more sweetly, knowing it will be kept in a worthy place." The men murmured approval, amused by her curiosity. Conrad, clearly proud, gestured. A servant appeared, though he was unlike the brothers. Thin, grey-skinned, his eyes hollow, he shuffled like a man half dead. In his hands he carried a vessel of black stone, carved with runes. The surface shimmered faintly, as though 1,000 whispers clung to its edges. Conrad lifted the lid. Inside was not liquid, but light, swirling threads of countless colours, twisting, colliding, unravelling, then binding again. They moved like souls trapped in a storm. Each voice becomes part of the great chorus. Conrad explained reverently, "When I drink, I taste not only the sound, but the life it carried. Joy, grief, love, fear, all distilled. Do you understand now? You will never die, Amelie. You will join eternity. She forced herself to nod, though bile rose in her throat. Eternity, as a drink, sipped away until nothing remained but a stitch on a tapestry. The servant's eyes flicked to hers for the briefest moment. There was no life in them, only despair, but she caught a flicker of something else. Warning, perhaps. His lips parted slightly, but no words came, only the faintest exhale, like the ghost of a sigh. Then Conrad snapped the lid shut, and the room shuddered as though exhaling all at once. The feast resumed, but Amelie's mind churned. She had seen enough. She needed to escape. Yet how? Every doorway seemed guarded by a tapestry whose eyes followed her. The men circled her like wolves, coaxing her to sing, pressing goblets into her hands. She raised them to her lips, pretending to sip, letting the cold glow of stolen voices slide down without swallowing. Her chance came when the brothers grew drunk on their feast of echoes, their speech slurred, laughter rising, the voices they borrowed bleeding into one another until they became grotesque parodies. One spoke in a child's voice, another crooned in tones too high for a man's throat, another cackled with 3 voices at once. Conrad, though, remained sharp. His eyes never left her. "Now, bride," he murmured, "a song for me, only for me." Her pulse hammered. She forced herself to smile sweetly, standing slowly from her chair. "Of course, my lord, but if you wish it to be yours alone, then you must follow me, away from these others. The song will lose its sweetness if it is overheard." The brothers jeered and whistled, but Conrad silenced them with a raised hand. His hunger outweighed caution. "Lead the way," he said softly. She walked toward the stairs at the far end of the hall, heart pounding with every step. She prayed he would follow, and he did. The stairway curved downward, deeper into the house. She descended, her fingers brushing the wall to keep from trembling. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. At the bottom, she found another hall, but this one was not for feasts. It was a crypt. Row upon row of figures stood in alcoves carved into the stone. Women, men, even children. Their bodies were whole, but their eyes were empty, mouths frozen open in silent cries. They were husks, drained of everything that had once made them human. The sight nearly broke her composure, but she forced herself to turn to Conrad, hiding her horror behind a mask of awe. "Is this where they rest?" she whispered. He smiled, proud, as though showing her treasures. "Yes, vessels emptied, shells discarded. They are nothing now, but their voices live on in us." Amelie's hands clenched around her basket. She had hidden a small knife beneath the bread, a precaution born from unease. Now she felt its weight, like hope itself, but she knew she could not kill him. Not here, not with his brothers above. She needed another way. Her eyes fell on one of the husks, A young woman, her hair long and dark, her lips cracked and pale. Something flickered in her empty eyes, not life, but resistance. A faint, glimmering light hovered just at her throat. And then, in a voice no louder than breath, the husk whispered, "Steal the vessel." The whisper from the husk was thin as cobweb, yet it pierced Amelie like a blade. Her head whipped toward the alcove, but the woman's lips no longer moved. Her body hung slack, her skin waxen. Had Amelie imagined it? No. She could still feel the words lingering in the air, like a faint vibration in her bones. Steal the vessel. Conrad did not seem to notice. His gaze lingered on Amelie, sharp and unblinking. "This place frightens you," he said, almost tenderly. "Do not fear. Soon you will join the chorus, and fear will be gone. All will be song." She forced a tremulous smile. "Yes, but I would like to see more, to understand what I am becoming part of." He seemed pleased by her obedience. Taking her hand, he led her deeper into the crypt. The husks stood like statues on either side of the hall, their mouths frozen open. Their voices, their laughter, their screams were gone. Only emptiness remained. The silence pressed heavier with every step. At the far end was a chamber lit by cold blue fire. There stood the vessel, the black stone urn she had glimpsed earlier, now resting upon a pedestal. Strange runes pulsed across its surface, shifting as though alive. Inside, swirled threads of stolen sound, glimmers of light caught in eternal storm. Her breath caught. The vessel was larger than she remembered, its aura almost alive. Whispers slithered against her ears, half-formed words, fragments of lullabies, broken laughter, fragments of prayers, thousands of voices, all trapped. Conrad bowed before it like an altar. Here is the heart of our feast. Each voice poured into eternity, woven into us. You will join them soon. Amelie's pulse quickened. She had no chance against him here, but if she could touch the vessel, if she could find a way to free the voices, maybe she could unravel his power. She bent low, feigning reverence. Her eyes scanned the chamber. No locks, no chains, only the pedestal and its burden. Yet the air thrummed with enchantment. This was no simple object to seize. "May I?" she whispered. "May I look closer?" Conrad's smile curved. "Eager, aren't you?" He gestured for her to step forward. Amelie approached. The vessel's hum grew louder, almost drowning her thoughts. She reached out a trembling hand, and for a moment she felt heat against her skin, then cold, then nothing at all, like touching smoke. The surface of the urn rippled under her palm, as though it were not stone, but water. A whisper slipped into her mind. "Help us!" She nearly cried out. Dozens of voices clamoured, each one straining to reach her. She saw flashes in her mind. A woman torn from her child, a girl dragged into the forest, an old woman silenced mid-prayer. Their agony pressed against her until she could hardly breathe. Conrad's hand closed gently over hers, pulling her back. Enough. The vessel chooses when to speak, not you. He turned her toward him, his face unnervingly close. Sing for me now, Amelie. Give me a taste, one note, and I will show you how eternity feels. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream, but she knew that would only bind her further. Instead, she bowed her head and whispered, "Not here, not among the husks. Let me give you my song in a place of warmth, not death." Conrad studied her, suspicion flickering in his eyes. For a long moment, she feared he would see through her. Then he smiled faintly. "As you wish, but you cannot escape what you are meant for." He led her back up the stair, the crypt's silence following like a shadow. That night, Amelie was given a chamber in the house. It was beautiful, almost mockingly so. Velvet drapes, golden mirrors, a bed soft as cloud. But she could not shake the memory of the husks, the vessel's storm of stolen voices. She sat in the candlelight, clutching her small knife, trembling. If she tried to flee through the forest, she would be lost in the silence, found before she reached the edge. If she stayed, they would drink her voice until nothing remained. Her only hope was the vessel. If she could free the voices, perhaps the house itself would collapse. Perhaps the brothers would fall. But how? The whisper returned, faint and urgent, slipping through the candlelight. "Break it." Amelie startled. The room was empty, yet the voice pressed against her ears. "Steady now. Break the vessel, and we will be free." Her pulse quickened. She rose, pushing aside the curtain, and froze. Across the courtyard, lit by moonlight, the servant stood. The grey, hollow-eyed man who had carried the urn earlier. He was staring directly at her window. Slowly, deliberately, he raised one finger to his lips. Silence. Then he pointed toward the crypt, and his lips formed words without sound. Tomorrow. Sleep came only in fragments, broken by whispers. Faces floated through her dreams. Elsbeth, old Martha, countless women calling her name. They clung to her, begging, urging, guiding. She awoke before dawn, heart pounding, sweat cold against her skin. The house was quiet, too quiet. She rose, clutching her knife, and moved to the door. It was unlocked. She slipped into the hall. Shadows loomed, but no one stirred. She followed the path the servant had shown, down into the crypt once more. The air thrummed with hunger, as if the walls themselves breathed. The husks loomed in their alcoves, silent sentinels of horror. Yet now their eyes followed her. Dim light flickered at their throats, pulsing with each step she took. The vessel waited at the chamber's end, its storm of voices swirling brighter than before, and beside it stood the servant. Up close, she saw how broken he was. Skin pale as ash, lips cracked, veins like black threads beneath the surface. But his eyes were clear now, sharp with desperation. "You cannot kill him," he rasped, though no sound touched the air. His lips moved, and yet the words arrived in her head. "The brothers feed on voices. They cannot be cut. They cannot bleed. Only the vessel binds them. Break it, and they unravel." Amelie's hand tightened on her knife. "How?" she whispered, though her own voice was a trembling ghost. The servant glanced at the husks, then at her basket, still slung over her arm from yesterday. "The bread you brought. Inside, you hid a blade. Use it, but beware. The vessel does not wish to die. It will fight." As if to confirm, the urn pulsed with sudden light, the whispers rising into a cacophony. The air thickened, pressing against her chest, clawing into her mind. The servant seized her shoulders. "If you falter, you will join them. Do not falter." Amelie stepped forward. The vessel's glow seared her eyes, its whispers clawing at her thoughts, promising eternity, promising beauty, promising she would never be forgotten. Her knife shook in her hand. She raised it high, and the urn screamed. The next morning dawned shrouded in mist so thick the village seemed half drowned in a grey sea. The bride awoke with a start, her skin damp and clammy, her ears still ringing with the cries of the voices she had dreamt of. In her mind, she saw the forest path, the clearing, and the house that swallowed echoes. But when she reached for the memory of the girl's scream, all she heard was silence. It was as though her dream had been devoured. She dressed slowly, her hands trembling. Her father called from the kitchen, asking if she would join him, but his voice wavered as though travelling through water. She paused for a heartbeat. She wondered if he was truly speaking, or if she only remembered him speaking. What if his voice had already been stolen? She rushed down, half mad with dread, but he was there, seated at the table, his features kind and untroubled. He smiled when he saw her. "You've been dreaming," he said, as though he already knew. "Be careful, daughter. Some dreams do not fade, but linger, and they mean things." The warning chilled her, though he said it gently. Later that day, she walked to the well with her basket, hoping the simple act of fetching water would ground her in the ordinary. The lane should have been full of neighbours calling to one another, children chasing one another with sticks. Instead, she found the lane strangely hushed. People moved about, but many did not speak. Their mouths opened, but no sound came. They looked at one another, wide-eyed, gesturing awkwardly, and yet their voices were gone. One woman passed by with her pail. The bride called out, "Good morning." But the woman only opened her mouth in reply, and the shape of the words formed without sound. The bride staggered back, her pulse quickening. The world had grown quieter, but not from lack of sound. No, she realized with horror that the voices themselves were being taken. By the time she returned home, her father looked at her strangely, as though her fear had unsettled him. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked in a low tone. "Others have noticed too. People are losing their words, losing their selves. They wander like hollow reeds." The bride sat heavily at the table. "It is him," she whispered, "the one I am meant to marry. His house eats voices. His brothers drink the screams." Her father stared, his expression tightening, but he did not contradict her. That evening, the mist deepened until it clung to the windows like breathing. The bride sat awake long after her father had gone to bed. A faint humming filled the night, so soft it might have been mistaken for the wind. But she knew better. She pressed her palms to her ears, but it seeped through her bones. It was the hum of stolen voices, woven together, fed back into the world as a song of hunger. When sleep finally took her, she dreamed of her fiancé's face, but it was hollow. His mouth opened, and a dozen voices poured out, all begging, all screaming, all whispering her name. She woke with blood in her mouth from biting her tongue. Days passed, each one colder than the last. The villagers grew restless. Those who still had voices used them sparingly, as though afraid of drawing notice. A few already walked the lanes with their mouths open in silent grief. No one spoke of it aloud, but everyone knew the evil was near, and it was tied to the man she was to wed. When the summons came, a message from the groom himself, her heart nearly stopped. "Come to me, the feast is prepared." The paper reeked faintly of damp earth and resin, and when she touched it, she swore she could hear faint cries beneath the ink, as though words had been bled into the parchment. Her father urged her not to go, but she knew she must, for if she did not confront him, the taking would never stop. With trembling hands, she packed a small satchel, a loaf of bread, a flask of water, and a candle stub. She slipped a knife into her bodice. Not that she believed steel could fend off whatever fed in the woods, but because it felt better to carry it. The forest was waiting, patient as a grave. The path wound deep into the mist, each step muffled as though the trees themselves had swallowed sound. The further she walked, the more she felt the forest listening. She caught glimpses of faces in the bark, open mouths stretched wide in voiceless screams. At last she saw the house. It was as it had been in her dream, sagging timbers, a thatched roof dripping with moss, windows hollow and staring like eyes. Yet even in its ruin there was a strange beauty. The air trembled faintly around it, and the mist gathered toward it as though it drank even the fog. She raised her hand to knock, but before she could, the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, as though soaked with sound that could not escape. She stepped into the gloom, her candle guttering. The hall was long, lined with shelves, and on each shelf sat jars. Within them swirled faintly glowing wisps, voices trapped like fireflies. Some screamed, some wept, some laughed endlessly, each sealed away. The bride's heart hammered. She walked further in, and as she passed, the jars trembled, as though recognizing her. From the far end of the hall, her groom emerged. His smile was charming, practiced, the same as it had been in the village, but his eyes were deeper now, hollower, filled with an echo of too many voices. "My bride," he said warmly, though his words seemed to carry 3 tones at once. "Welcome to your new home." The groom's hand extended toward her, elegant, pale, long-fingered. His smile was warmth crafted for her comfort, but behind it lay the trembling chorus of voices that shifted and sighed like restless birds in his throat. The bride did not take his hand. Instead, she clutched her candle closer, the flame wavering, as if reluctant to stay alight. She whispered, "What is this place?" He tilted his head, as though amused she would ask. "Our hall of remembrance," he said smoothly. His voice carried 3 notes at once, harmonies that jarred together but somehow seemed intentional. Every life has a song. Too often they are wasted, scattered to winds, forgotten before their echoes fade. But I preserve them. She glanced at the shelves, at the countless jars quivering faintly with imprisoned voices. Their whispers grew more frantic. The closer she walked, a desperate cacophony muffled by glass. "You keep them," she said hoarsely, "but they are not yours." "They are now." His smile deepened, sharp as a blade. "To marry me, my love, is to share in eternity. The feast is waiting. You will see what it means to belong to something greater than yourself." He gestured, and the air shifted. A door appeared that had not been there before, swinging open onto a room glowing with golden candlelight. The bride hesitated, but his presence pressed behind her like a tide. Reluctantly, she stepped forward. The room was vast, longer than the house itself should allow. The ceiling arched impossibly high, supported by beams that seemed grown rather than built. A great table stretched from end to end, piled with platters of food, roasted meats, sugared fruits, goblets brimming with dark wine. Yet the bride's stomach turned as she looked closer. The roasted bird still twitched faintly. The fruit pulsed with something like breath, and the wine shimmered as though filled not with liquid, but with voices, trapped and swirling, seeking escape. Seated around the table were men, 12 of them, brothers, she guessed, though none looked precisely alike. Their faces were sharp and lean, their eyes gleaming with unnatural light. When they spoke, their words overlapped, weaving together into a droning chant that shook the marrow of her bones. One of the men stood, his smile thin. "She has come," he said, and though the words belonged to him, a dozen other voices echoed within them. "At last, she will join us." The groom drew her to the head of the table. "Sit," he commanded softly, and though her body resisted, her knees bent almost against her will, she found herself before a goblet brimming with that strange liquid. It shimmered like black glass, and within it, faint faces pressed against the surface, mouths open in silent screams. Her fingers hovered above the cup. She whispered, "What is it?" "Voices," said her groom, his tone rich with pride. "Songs distilled. Drink, and you will understand. Drink, and you will belong." She stared into the goblet, her reflection fractured by the rippling faces. She saw her mouth open, saw a scream form before she could utter it. She forced her eyes away. "I cannot." "You must," said one of the brothers. "To refuse is to starve." Their words pressed on her, heavy as iron, but she clenched her fists. "Then I will starve." The brothers laughed, the sound like wind through dead leaves. Her groom, however, did not laugh. He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. "You will not starve," he whispered. "You will sing. You already carry a voice I desire above all others. That is why you are here. That is why you are mine." Her heart clenched. "My voice," she breathed. "Yes," he said, his smile widening. "Your voice will complete our chorus, sweet and strong, unbroken. It will echo forever, binding this house, binding me." Her stomach turned cold, and for the first time she realized the truth. The feast was not meant for her to eat, but for her to be eaten. The brothers raised their goblets. "Let her sing," they murmured in unison. "Let her voice join the feast." The groom stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder, deceptively gentle. "Do not fight it, my bride. Few are chosen, fewer still are loved enough to be kept whole." She looked again at the goblet before her, at the faces pressing against the glass. Their eyes begged her, silently screaming. They had once thought themselves chosen too, and now they were nothing but echoes. Her pulse thundered, her hand slid beneath the table, fingers brushing the knife hidden in her bodice. Its hilt was plain, its blade dull with age, but it was hers. If she could not fight their hunger, perhaps she could resist, becoming part of it. The groom lifted his own goblet and raised it in a toast. "To the feast." The brothers echoed, their voices overlapping in a shuddering harmony. "To the feast." The bride tightened her grip on the knife. The long hall shimmered with light and shadow, the goblets at each place trembling as if eager for the voices they contained. The bride sat rigid, her hands clutched tightly around the knife hidden beneath her skirt. Around her, The brothers murmured and hummed, tasting the stolen voices in their glasses, each sip sending tremors of sound through the air. Her groom leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear, carrying with it the faintest echo of someone else's laughter. "Sing, my bride," he murmured, "just one note, one song, and you will understand why this is necessary." Amelie's throat felt thick, her pulse hammering. She could not sing, she would not. If she gave them even a single note, she knew her own self would be stripped away, thread by thread, until she was only an echo in their hall. Her gaze flicked to the goblet before her. Within the dark liquid, the trapped faces shimmered, their eyes wide with silent pleas. Among them, she thought she saw a familiar face, the grey-eyed servant who had warned her. He floated faintly, almost translucent, one hand pressed against the inside of the glass. His lips moved, and she could feel the words without hearing them. "Take it, free us." A tremor ran through her, and she realized perhaps she could fight, perhaps the vessel could be turned against them. The brothers leaned toward her, their voices rising, urging, chanting, "Sing, sing, join us, belong." Their tones overlapped, creating a wall of sound that pressed against her mind. Each voice carried fragments of memory, of lives they had consumed, and the chorus threatened to crush her. Amelie gritted her teeth. She could not, would not allow herself to be swallowed. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted the goblet toward her lips, not to drink, but to tilt it, to study the vessel more closely. The light inside it swirled, threads of stolen sound, writhing like snakes. She could sense the weight of centuries of stolen voices, all confined, all yearning to be free. Her mind raced. If she struck at the goblet, if she shattered it, would the voices be lost or freed? The servant's warning echoed in her memory. Break it, and they unravel. The brothers noticed her hesitation. One of them, the eldest perhaps, moved closer. "Do not toy with it, little bride," he warned. "The vessel does not forgive." The groom's hand found her shoulder again, steadying her, coaxing. "Do you fear me, my love?" His voice carried the warmth of flattery, but beneath it was a pulse of something cold, ancient. "Fear is natural, but I promise, only obedience keeps you safe." She shook her head, fighting the spell of his words. "I do not fear," she whispered. "I only wonder." At that, the room seemed to pause. The brothers' humming faltered, the goblets trembled, and the stolen voices in the vessel shivered. Her chance. With a sudden movement, she lifted her knife and swung at the goblet. It rang with a sharp, ringing note as the blade struck the black stone. Light erupted from the surface, blinding, deafening. Threads of stolen voices burst upward, spiraling into the hall like birds released from cages. The brothers screamed, or at least tried to. Their mouths opened, but the sounds were swallowed by the chaos of their own voices, now torn from the goblet and writhing in the air. The groom staggered backward, clutching at the escaping threads, his harmonized song breaking into jagged fragments. Amelie stumbled but stayed upright, gripping the knife, watching as the room transformed. The jars lining the walls cracked, releasing more threads of sound that filled the hall. Whispers, laughter, cries of despair, all intermingled in a chaotic symphony that overwhelmed her senses. The grey-eyed servant appeared at her side, faint but solid enough to guide her. He pointed toward a hidden door, partially obscured by shadows. "Go," he mouthed silently. "Before they recover." She followed without hesitation. The brothers' voices pursued her, a cacophony that tugged at her mind, but she pressed on. The door led to a narrow stair, spiralling upward, twisting impossibly through the house. At the top, she emerged into the courtyard. Mist swirled around her feet, and the first rays of dawn broke through the forest canopy. For a moment, relief flooded her. She had escaped the feast, but the sound of the released voices followed her, faint and haunting. The house itself seemed to sigh, mourning the loss of its stolen songs. Amelie understood that she had not destroyed Conrad or his brothers. The house was still alive, still hungry, but the balance had shifted. Now they were vulnerable and the voices were free, at least for the moment. Yet she felt a chill as she glanced back. The windows of the hall glimmered, and she could swear the groom's eyes were still fixed on her, watching, calculating. The feast was not over, not yet, but she was ready. The forest that morning seemed almost alive, the mist curling around the trees like spectral fingers. Amelie moved cautiously, each step careful to avoid snapping twigs that might betray her presence. The echoes of the freed voices lingered in the air, faint and fluttering like trapped moths struggling toward light. She could hear them whispering to one another, warning one another, celebrating the small taste of freedom she had given them. But she knew it would not last. The house was patient. Conrad was patient. The brothers were patient. And patience in their kind meant cruelty measured with precision. Like the slow drip of water that carved stone, Amelie made her way to the village, seeking counsel from those who had survived the whispers of the forest. Few dared speak. Most had lost the ability to call their neighbours' names or to share even the simplest words. One old woman, bent with age and trembling as she held a wooden staff, beckoned Amelie to sit. "You have tasted it," the woman said, her cracked lips forming words in a rhythm that Amelie understood, even without sound. "You have touched the vessel. You have seen the hollow. Do you know what you face?" "I know he will not stop," Amelie said, her voice firm despite the fear twisting in her chest. "He will consume every voice in the village, every song, every memory, until there is nothing left." The woman nodded. "Then you must act. You cannot fight them as you would men. Their strength lies not in arms, but in what they have taken. To defeat them, you must understand the feast itself, the vessel, the songs, the stolen echoes. There is a way, but it is dangerous. Amelie listened as the woman explained. The vessel was not merely a container of voices, but a binding of souls. Each sip by the brothers strengthened their power, connected them to the hall and to one another. If the vessel were broken, the voices would return to their owners, but only if the threads were guided. Left unchecked, the freed voices could scatter, dissipate, and the house would recover, feeding anew. You will need a conductor, the old woman whispered. Someone to call the voices, to guide them, someone to lead them back, not just free them. Amelie realized that she would have to sing, not to Conrad, not to the feast, but for the voices themselves. She would have to pour her life, her energy, into the song of liberation. The thought terrified her. Her own voice had almost been stolen, and she had felt what it meant to be consumed. Could she risk it again? Could she trust herself to wield the power that had nearly destroyed her? The old woman placed her trembling hand over Amelie's. It is the only way. You are their bridge. You are the only one who can turn their chaos into order. And if you fail, she let the warning hang in the air, a weight that pressed down like the forest itself. You will become one of them, Amelie nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had no other choice. That night, she returned to the edge of the forest, moving silently under the cover of darkness. She approached the house cautiously, feeling the weight of every shadow, every whisper of sound that rose from the mist. The structure seemed to breathe, exhaling a low, vibrating hum that carried the memory of all the voices it had consumed. Inside, the house was quieter than before. The brothers were gathered near the remains of the shattered goblet, their murmuring a discordant attempt to recapture the lost voices. Conrad stood at the head of the hall, eyes gleaming, his harmonized tones more threatening than ever. "They have fled," he said, his voice splitting and weaving like threads of glass. "But they cannot escape for long. The feast is eternal, and all who enter are mine." Amelie stepped into the hall, candle in hand. The brothers' gaze fell on her immediately, and the air seemed to tighten. She could hear the echoes of voices swirling faintly, brushing against the walls, nudging her to act. She lifted the candle higher, letting its flickering light fall across the shards of the vessel. Conrad's smile widened. "You returned," he said, voice coiling around her like smoke. "Brave or foolish, let us see if your song will serve you." She drew a deep breath, feeling the threads of all the stolen voices brushing against her consciousness. She could feel their fear, their hope, their despair. Slowly, she let her lips part. She would sing, not to him, not for them, but for the voices themselves. At first, her notes were tentative, trembling, almost swallowed by the vast hall, but as she continued, her confidence grew. She wove the threads of the stolen sounds together, guiding them with her melody, shaping the chaos into harmony. The brothers flinched as their stolen power began to slip from their grasp. Conrad's face twisted with fury, his harmonized tones clashing violently as he tried to reassert control. The house trembled, walls cracked, floors shuddered, and shards of the broken goblet began to pulse, resonating with her song. The voices of the trapped souls rose, now guided, singing in a chorus that filled the hall, echoing off stone and timber alike. Conrad lunged toward her, his hands outstretched, trying to grasp her, to silence her, but the bride did not falter. She poured all her strength, all her terror, all her courage into the song. The voices she led became a shield, repelling him, unraveling the threads that bound the brothers. The hall shook violently, dust raining from the beams. The brothers screamed, their voices splitting into the fragments they had once consumed, spinning chaotically before fleeing into the night. Conrad roared, a sound that was not entirely his own, and the shards of the vessel glowed with blinding light. Amelie continued to sing, feeling herself grow weaker, even as the voices regained their freedom. But she refused to stop. She would not let them remain prisoners any longer. And then, as the first light of dawn pierced the misty windows, the hall fell silent. The brothers were gone, scattered and diminished, and Conrad's form had vanished into the air, leaving only the faintest echo of a song behind. The shards of the vessel lay inert on the floor, empty and powerless. The freed voices whispered their thanks, delicate as leaves rustling in wind, before dissipating into the morning. Amelie collapsed to her knees, exhausted but alive, surrounded by the quiet peace of a house finally emptied of its hunger. For now, the forest was still, the feast had ended, and the echoes had found their freedom. Amelie rose slowly, the weight of exhaustion pressing into her bones like stones. The hall was quiet, the air trembling with the memory of all that had passed. Sunlight streamed through the shattered windows, scattering gold across the wooden floorboards and illuminating the shards of the vessel, now dull and lifeless. She stepped carefully over the broken pieces, avoiding their jagged edges, and felt a strange satisfaction in knowing that the instrument of so much horror was no longer whole. It could no longer bind voices, could no longer feed the hunger of the house. She turned her gaze upward, toward the high, shadowed rafters, and thought she could see the outlines of faces, those of the brothers, dissolving into nothing. The house had lost its guardians, its predators outside, The forest was still, almost too still. Amelie paused at the doorway, letting the cool morning air wash over her. The mist had lifted slightly, and with it came the first signs of life. Birds calling, a fox darting across the underbrush, leaves trembling in the gentle wind. The world beyond the house seemed fragile, but alive, and it had survived. She retraced her steps to the village cautiously, aware that some remnants of the house's hunger might linger, but the streets were quieter than they had been, and while some villagers still moved with a strange hesitance, most spoke once again, their voices timid but alive. A few approached her, eyes wide, asking for news, for reassurance, and Amelie realised that she had returned not only as a survivor, but as a liberator. Her father met her at the edge of the village, his expression a mixture of relief and awe. He did not ask questions, did not demand explanations. He only embraced her, letting her rest against his chest for a moment before releasing her to her own resolve. Word of the robber bridegroom's disappearance spread quickly, though few dared venture near the forest to confirm it. Amelie did not need to investigate. She had seen the house's halls, had felt its hunger, had heard the echoes of all it had consumed. It was finished, at least as finished as such a place could be. In the days that followed, Amelie worked quietly to ensure that no remnant of the house's power remained. She returned to the crypt beneath its floor, now crumbled and overgrown, and scattered the shards of the vessel across the earth. She sang softly as she worked, guiding any lingering threads of voices toward freedom, helping them return to the world, to the trees, to the winds, to the villagers they had once belonged to. When her task was complete, she stood at the edge of the forest once more, looking back at the ruin that had been the robber bridegroom's domain. There was no triumph in her eyes, no glee in her heart, only the steady, hard-won knowledge that she had survived and that she had restored what could be restored. The villagers slowly began to reclaim their lives, cautious at first, then with more confidence. Children's laughter returned to the streets, though Amelie knew it carried a subtle weight of remembrance, a collective understanding of what had been lost and regained. She moved among them quietly, not seeking recognition, but offering help where it was needed, a living testament to the courage that had seen them through. At night, she would sometimes hear faint whispers in her dreams, but they were different now, gentle, grateful, harmonious. She understood them as the echoes of those she had freed, lingering not as captives, but as voices restored to the world, singing their own songs once more. And so, life resumed, fragile yet enduring. The house in the forest stood empty, its halls quiet, its hunger gone. The robber bridegroom and his brothers were nothing more than shadows in memory, and the village, forever changed, had regained its voice, Amelie's own voice, tempered by fear and courage, carried forward into the days that followed. She told her story when asked, carefully, sparingly, enough to warn, enough to remember, never enough to frighten needlessly, and in telling it, she ensured that the echoes of the feast would linger only as a lesson, that courage, cleverness, and the will to act could overcome even the darkest of hungers. The forest remained silent and patient, but it had learned as well that even the hungriest shadows could be broken, and that voices, once freed, could never be taken again. Amelie walked among the trees, now a protector of sorts, a guardian of voices, her heart steady and her song hers alone. And in the quiet, she knew that she had survived, not merely by wit or chance, but by listening, truly listening, to the voices of those who had come before her, and trusting herself to guide them home. The feast of echoes was ended. The robber bridegroom's hunger was spent, and the world, fragile and battered though it was, began again.